The most expensive 2 words Eric Trump never learned to say were, "I'm sorry." Tonight, the bill came due, delivered by a woman who knew the true cost of an invoice. The atmosphere in the CNN studio for the business of politics was manufactured for politeness. A veneer of civility Eric Trump desperately needed to maintain his carefully constructed image as an unjustly persecuted corporate heir. He had volunteered for this appearance, seeking to wash away the stain of a recent $4 million fraud fine and the humiliating court order banning him from running a New York company for 2 years. This was to be his triumphant return. A moment to reassert the narrative that the Trump Organization's decades of aggressive business practices were merely political witch hunts. But the meticulously balanced panel, half conservative, half progressive audience, moderated by Anderson Cooper, had one asymmetrical element: Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She was a late, almost accidental, addition, a Democrat meant to offer predictable pushback. Predictable, however, was not in her lexicon. Crockett was not a pundit. She was a meticulously trained public defender who specialized in the cold, hard currency of evidence, while Eric Trump practiced his power poses and talking points about fake news and political persecution. Crockett was immersed in the paper trail. She had dissected every financial disclosure, every deposition, every state attorney general filing pertaining to the Trump Organization and its myriad scandals. Her preparation was surgical, designed not for a debate, but for a cross-examination. She entered the studio carrying a single, unassuming briefcase. It was the antithesis of a legal war chest, yet it contained the tactical nuclear documentation necessary to obliterate Eric's public persona. Upon meeting him before the broadcast, her smile was less an expression of warmth and more the silent certainty of a prosecutor who knew the specific date and time of her opponent's biggest lie. Prepared for a substantive dialogue about business ethics, Eric proclaimed with a firm handshake, projecting confidence that verged on defiance. "My preparation is complete," Crockett simply affirmed, her voice calm. The subtext, "Your preparation is irrelevant," was palpable, yet entirely missed by her opponent. The broadcast began with Eric, dressed in an expensive navy suit, radiating the practiced self-assurance of a man who believed his inherited wealth made him bulletproof. He was ready for the predictable attacks. He was ready for political outrage. He was fundamentally unprepared for a woman armed with undeniable receipts. The ensuing minutes would become the most viral segment CNN had seen in years. Marking the precise moment Eric Trump ceased being a media darling businessman and became a cautionary tale of unaccountable privilege meeting meticulous accountability. Anderson Cooper, with his hallmark gravitas, steered the conversation to Eric's celebrated philanthropic work. The moderator's tone suggested this was a friendly initial territory, a softball pitch designed for an easy home run. Eric's face immediately brightened, shifting into the familiar, well-rehearsed mask of the humble humanitarian. The Eric Trump Foundation was his centerpiece, a legacy he had tirelessly promoted for years. The foundation, he boasted, had channeled over $16 million to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The crowning achievement was the Eric Trump Foundation ICU, a $20 million unit dedicated to treating critically ill children. He described the operation with a self-congratulatory focus on efficiency, claiming an expense ratio of a mere 12%. The audience was meant to understand that nearly every dollar went directly to saving children. The central pillar of his narrative involved the complementary use of Trump Organization assets. His father, he proclaimed, had generously donated the usage of the family's opulent golf courses for all fundraising tournaments. The entire organization, he asserted, absorbed all costs associated with these events. When donors contributed to the foundation, Eric stated, leaning into the camera with earnest sincerity, they were not paying for expensive overhead or fancy parties. They were paying for medicine, for hope, and for doctors. He paused for the dramatic effect his family had perfected, every single dollar. The conservative half of the audience responded with a wave of applause. An immediate validation of the narrative of selfless, efficient philanthropy. Eric offered a graceful, practiced nod of acceptance. Jasmine Crockett remained perfectly still. Her hands rested lightly on the briefcase. Her expression unreadable. A truly commendable achievement, Mr. Trump, Crockett observed, her voice smooth and measured, devoid of challenge. Therefore, the use of the family's golf courses for these critical fundraising events was entirely, unequivocally free of charge to the foundation. Absolutely, Eric confirmed, his posture rigid with pride. My father's donation ensured the foundation did not incur a single dime of expense for the course usage. That was the unique genius of our model. The almost silent, surgical click of the briefcase latch cut through the studio's atmosphere. It was the sound of a carefully placed truth bomb being armed. If that is the case, Crockett continued, producing a single, clearly marked tax document, an IRS Form 990, and holding it up for the camera and the monitor behind them. Perhaps you could reconcile that generous donation with this document. The document, she specified, was a required tax filing for the Eric Trump Foundation. Your foundation's own records indicate that it paid the Trump Organization $342 between 2014 and 2016 for the use of those exact golf courses. For events you claimed were entirely free. The number hung in the air like a visible cloud of smoke. Eric's polished, philanthropic smile evaporated instantly. Those figures represent operational costs. Eric attempted to counter, his confidence visibly dissolving, replaced by an attempt at corporate jargon. Operational costs, Crockett echoed, turning the phrase over like a suspect item. She produced a second item, a 2017 investigative report from Forbes. Interestingly, a 2017 journalistic inquiry, a non-political entity, discovered something different. It found that the foundation initially was not being charged. However, the report indicates your father personally intervened to ensure the Trump Organization began receiving payment for the events. She added the crucial detail: following that intervention, the costs billed to your children's charity for golf tournaments subsequently tripled. Crockett cited the charity experts consulted by Forbes who unanimously deemed these escalating charges to defy any reasonable cost for a charity golf event, with one expert labeling the financial arrangement unconscionable. Eric shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand adjusting his collar, a clear sign of distress. He attempted to dismiss the investigation, but Crockett cut him off, her voice maintaining its measured pitch, yet now infused with the cold authority of the courtroom. As a former public defender, I have reviewed countless financial arrangements in the pursuit of justice, she stated, leaning forward slightly, and when funds explicitly designated for the care of sick children are instead redirected into a private, family-owned business for profit, we have a legal term for that activity. Her gaze hardened, meeting his directly. We call that theft. She pointed out the consensus. The Forbes report called it self-dealing. The New York Attorney General labeled it a violation of charitable trust. I simply call it the family business model your father meticulously taught you. The audience stirred, a ripple of uncomfortable shock spreading even through the conservative section. Anderson Cooper's expression transitioned from curious moderation to intense, professional concern. Eric Trump was experiencing a sensation entirely foreign to him, the incontrovertible weight of an undeniable paper trail. The media training offered no defense against the receipts. Eric attempted the classic pivot, forcing his voice back into a tone of robust positivity. Regardless of operational disagreements, the foundation accomplished tremendous work. We built the ICU. We helped thousands of children. That positive impact is what truly matters. The positive impact matters immensely. Crockett agreed, her voice retaining a deceptive gentleness. Which is why it is so profoundly baffling that after all this tremendous work, after raising $16 million and constructing that beautiful ICU, you and your siblings, the leadership, were subsequently ordered by a New York court to undergo mandatory training on how to properly operate a charity. The phrase mandatory training detonated in the studio. Cooper immediately looked to Eric for confirmation. That was merely a component of a deeply politically motivated lawsuit, Eric insisted, attempting to regain control of the terms of the discussion. Crockett's hand was already out of her briefcase, holding another document aloft, the official court order. The relevant portion is here. Mr. Trump, the settlement agreement explicitly includes mandatory training requirements for Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, and Eric Trump. She fixed him with a look of genuine disappointment, bordering on pity. This was not a political attack from a partisan opponent. This was a New York State Supreme Court judge concluding, after reviewing the evidence, that the Trump family literally lacked the basic legal and ethical capacity to manage charitable funds without violating the law. The Trump Foundation, she reminded the audience, was not voluntarily closed, it was shut down by court order. The family was forced to pay $2 million in damages, and the adult children were required to submit to the exact kind of fiduciary training legitimate nonprofit executives receive before handling public donations, not after they were caught misusing them. Eric's jaw tightened. He attempted to counter by citing the foundation's total donations, but Crockett was faster, pivoting to the documented abuses. Your father, using that foundation, chose to pay off his business's legal settlements, purchase a $10 portrait of himself which was hung in a private golf resort, and funnel money into his presidential campaign. Crockett rapidly cataloged, that, Mr. Trump, is not charity, that is a tax-exempt slush fund. She elaborated, citing the specifics. The portrait hung at Trump National Doral Golf Resort, the $258 paid to settle lawsuits against Trump businesses in 2016, and the infamous 2016 fundraiser for veterans, where nearly $3 million raised went into the foundation and was then distributed not by charity officials, but by campaign staff at political events. The judge's finding, she read, detailed fiduciary breaches that included allowing his campaign to orchestrate the fundraiser, allowing his campaign to direct distribution of the funds, and using the funds to further Mr. Trump's political campaign. A judge found your father used money raised for veterans to help himself get elected. She concluded, letting the magnitude of the statement sink in. Eric managed only a weak defense. The veterans eventually received the money. Eventually, Crockett conceded with clinical precision. After journalists began asking pointed questions, after the Attorney General began investigating, after your father was caught, you do not receive credit for doing the right thing only after you have been discovered doing the wrong thing. She paused for a beat, letting the contrast hang in the air. Most Americans learn basic ethical guidelines in kindergarten. Your family required a court order to be taught those same lessons. And you are here tonight lecturing the country on business ethics. The progressive side of the studio erupted in applause. Eric Trump had faced hostile questioning before. He had endured abrasive depositions, participated in bruising congressional inquiries, and navigated the expected media ambushes. But facing Jasmine Crockett was different. Her approach was not hostile, it was meticulously forensic. Every accusation was buttressed by an official document. Every counter-argument was preemptively refuted by a court citation. She was making it impossible for him to pivot. Attempting to seize the narrative back, Eric employed the familiar defense of the beleaguered executive, cooperation and transparency. He claimed a willingness to answer any question, contrasting himself with unnamed figures in Washington. He insisted he had cooperated with every investigation, every single one, and proudly declared that he had nothing to hide. Crockett absorbed his declaration with a slow, Deliberate nod. Transparency is indeed admirable, Mr. Trump, she responded, her tone suggesting deep consideration of his words. So, concerning the New York Attorney General's civil investigation into the Trump Organization's financial practices. When you were questioned under oath in October 2020, you answered every single question put to you? Eric, sensing the trap closing, retreated instantly to the prepared legal defense. He stated only that he had exercised my constitutional rights. Crockett's neutral expression didn't waver, yet her focus sharpened visibly. Let us clarify exactly what that exercise looked like, she proposed. She reached into her briefcase again, retrieving a document that, to the audience, looked like a deposition transcript. She detailed the filing. According to the official court record, you invoked the Fifth Amendment, your right against self-incrimination, more than 500 times during that deposition. She paused, allowing the sheer magnitude of the number to settle over the hushed studio audience. 500 times in 6 hours. That equates to roughly one refusal to answer a question every 43 seconds. A palpable murmur spread through the audience. Eric's immediate reply was standard corporate evasion. That, Congresswoman, is standard legal advice when facing a politically motivated investigation designed solely to injure my father's political career. It is standard legal advice, Crockett acknowledged, readily agreeing with the technicality. Defense attorneys often recommend asserting the Fifth Amendment in high-stakes civil depositions, particularly when there is potential parallel criminal exposure. I am certainly not criticizing the legal strategy employed by your defense counsel. She then moved for the kill shot, shifting the focus from legal strategy to family standard. However, I am intensely curious about the standard you were taught to apply by your father regarding the invocation of that right. Mr. Trump, your father has very public, very defined opinions about people who take the Fifth Amendment. Do you recall them? Eric's strained silence was a clear answer. He absolutely recalled them and desperately wished she would not share them. Crockett didn't require permission. Her voice became a precise echo of a historical recording. In 2016, your father made an often repeated public statement, and I will quote it directly, "If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? The mob takes the Fifth Amendment." She let the statement hang, a rhetorical missile launched by Donald Trump and now aimed squarely at his son. Therefore, Mr. Trump, by your father's own definitive standard, I must ask, were you guilty? Or were you participating in the activities of the mob? Eric was visibly stunned, momentarily paralyzed by the unavoidable contradiction. He attempted to protest that the quote was taken entirely out of context. 500 times, Crockett reiterated, her voice cutting through his protest, rising just enough to command attention. You could not answer 500 questions about your own family business. The financial statements you signed. The operational decisions you directed. She began ticking off the topics on her fingers. The motion deliberate and damning. They inquired about property appraisals, Fifth Amendment. They asked about loan applications, Fifth Amendment. They inquired about specific financial statements, Fifth Amendment. They asked about conversations with your father regarding the company, Fifth Amendment. Crockett shook her head slowly, her expression evolving from clinical to profoundly disappointed. 6 hours. Mr. Trump, you occupied a deposition room for 6 hours. And you were unwilling or unable to provide a single substantive answer concerning the company that bears your name. The financial decisions you claim to be so proud of, or the basic execution of your job duties. Eric attempted to weakly assert that his lawyers had advised the strategy. I am fully aware of your legal advice, Crockett acknowledged, and it may have been tactically prudent. But here is the critical point. During that 2016 campaign, your father established an absolute rule for the American public. He asserted, emphatically and repeatedly, that invoking the Fifth Amendment was synonymous with guilt. He transformed it into a campaign slogan. She delivered the complete quote one last time, with devastating finality. Fifth Amendment. Fifth Amendment. Fifth Amendment. Horrible. Horrible. The mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? Crockett leaned in, her gaze relentless. If you are innocent, Mr. Trump, why did you assert that right 500 times? If you genuinely have nothing to conceal, why could you not answer a single essential question regarding the financial statements you personally certified? She drew upon her professional history for a chilling comparison. I spent years as a criminal defense attorney. I have cross-examined actual criminals, individuals accused of murder, armed robbery, and financial fraud on a massive, complex scale, and I can assure you, most of them provided more substantive answers than you did in that 6-hour window. 500 refusals in 6 hours. She concluded, that is not mere legal caution, Mr. Trump, that is a comprehensive act of concealment. And your father established the standard. Innocent people typically do not resort to that kind of hiding. Eric was speechless. For the first time that evening, his practiced bluster failed him completely. He had encountered a problem that could not be solved by inherited confidence or media training. The moderator, Anderson Cooper, sensing the segment was veering into a judicial interrogation, attempted to redirect. Eric Trump, however, saw the pivot point as an opportunity to change the battlefield to one he had extensively prepared for, the civil fraud trial. Let us absolutely discuss the fraud trial, Eric suddenly insisted, his voice regaining a desperate energy. What transpired in that courtroom was nothing short of a travesty, a biased judge, a politically motivated attorney general, and a predetermined outcome designed to inflict damage on my father's political prospects. I am delighted you wish to address it, Crockett replied, accepting the challenge. We should begin with the established facts of the outcome. You were personally ordered to pay a $4 million fine, correct? And you were banned from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation for 2 years? Under appeal, all of it, Eric swiftly clarified, invoking the automatic defense mechanism. Crockett produced yet another document, the official court ruling penned by Judge Arthur Engeron. Eric was now looking at the briefcase with undisguised loathing. Allow me to share Judge Engeron's assessment of your family's business conduct, Crockett announced, finding the highlighted passage. The frauds committed here, and I quote, shock the conscience. She looked up at Eric. That phrase, Mr. Trump, is not a political opinion. It is a legal determination. It signifies that the behavior was so fundamentally egregious that it offends the most basic tenets of justice. She continued reading from the ruling. The defendants exhibited a complete lack of contrition and remorse that borders on pathological. Pathological, she repeated, allowing the professional diagnosis to resonate. That is not a partisan attack. That is the conclusion of a judge who spent months observing your testimony and reviewing thousands of documents, concluding that your family's relationship with truth was not merely dishonest, but seemingly a psychological condition. Eric attempted to dismiss the judge as prejudiced. That judge, Crockett countered, watched you directly contradict your own sworn testimony. The American public deserves a clear understanding of your business methodology. She brandished a transcript, heavily marked with colored tabs. She proceeded to dissect the key contradictions in Eric's testimony. Under oath, Eric had initially claimed to possess an OCD-level attention to detail regarding his work at the Trump Organization, proudly asserting his intimate management knowledge. However, she continued, he then claimed, also under oath, that he was utterly uninvolved with the property appraisals that formed the core of the fraud case. He stated that appraisals were outside his purview and he had never reviewed the financial statements in question. Then the Attorney General's team introduced your own emails, Crockett stated, flipping to the relevant tab. Emails showing you in direct communication with executives regarding property valuations. emails showing you giving instructions, emails demonstrating your active participation in the exact process you had just testified you knew nothing about. She then read his own words back to him from the transcript. When confronted with these internal documents, which directly contradicted your prior testimony, you stated, and I quote, "It appears that way." Crockett drove home the point. Under oath, you essentially conceded that your preceding testimony appeared to be false. Eric's face was now dark red. He claimed his involvement was minimal. That explanation creates a logical problem. Crockett observed, you cannot credibly claim OCD-level attention to detail, while simultaneously asserting complete ignorance of the core fraudulent property valuations central to the business. You cannot be intimately involved in the company and oblivious to the documents carrying your own name. She introduced further damning evidence, the sworn testimony of Jeff McConney, the former Trump Organization controller, who testified that Eric had directed him to use specific, inflated numbers for valuations. This is not a partisan talking head making accusations. This is a man who worked for your company for 35 years. Testifying under oath that you personally issued instructions that resulted in fraudulent valuations. Crockett brought the segment to its painful climax by citing an observation from a former federal prosecutor who had watched Eric's performance, that he was dangerously close to perjuring himself. Do you understand the gravity of perjury, Mr. Trump? It signifies lying under oath. It means being caught telling a court one thing, then being caught saying the complete opposite. She presented him with the ultimate double bind. So, my question for the American people is this. Were you lying when you testified you had nothing to do with the fraudulent financial statements? Or were you lying when you claimed to have OCD attention to detail about everything you do? One of those claims must be false, perhaps both. Either way, Crockett concluded, setting the transcripts down with finality. You were a man who admitted under oath to either being complicit in massive financial fraud or being utterly incompetent to stop it. And yet, you are on national television tonight, asking America to trust your judgment regarding business ethics. The studio was now dominated by a heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional nervous cough from the audience. Eric Trump had been methodically stripped of every prepared defense. Anderson Cooper, seizing the momentary lull, introduced a highly consequential video clip. The screen behind the two guests flickered to life, showing a 2017 interview clip from Fox News. A younger Eric Trump, radiating self-righteous anger, was mid-rant about his political opposition. I've never witnessed hatred like this, the video version of Eric proclaimed, his face contorted, and to me, they're not even people. It's profoundly sad. Morality has simply vanished. Morals have flown out the window. And this country deserves far better than this. The clip ended abruptly. The camera returned to the studio, focusing first on a tight shot of the stunned Eric Trump, then moving to Jasmine Crockett. Crockett turned, addressing Eric directly and completely, making physical contact with him for the first time since their opening handshake. Mr. Trump, I am a Democrat. I am also a black woman from Texas. I dedicated years of my life to the criminal justice system, defending individuals the system had marginalized, people who made mistakes yet deserved representation. She maintained her calm, measured voice, yet it carried an undeniable force. In your worldview, Mr. Trump, am I a person? Eric's media training finally activated, driving him to the desperate, automatic defense. He insisted the statement was taken completely out of context. What context exists? Crockett immediately pressed, her voice sharp with disbelief. That renders, not even people, an acceptable statement? The rhetorical question hung heavy in the air. I have studied history, Mr. Trump, Crockett stated, the implication clear and chilling. I understand precisely what occurs when powerful men with vast platforms, immense wealth, and the ear of millions, begin to describe entire categories of human beings as not people. She allowed the historical gravity of the comparison to settle over the audience. It never concludes positively. It never ends well. Eric attempted to interject, asserting he was only referring to the political establishment's hatred. You were referring to half of America, Crockett corrected, her voice hardening. 48% of registered voters identify as Democrats. That population includes millions of teachers, nurses, veterans, grandparents, and small business owners. And you looked directly into a camera and declared that they aren't even people. You asserted that Democrats lack morals and that morality has flown out the window. Yet, Mr. Trump, Crockett challenged, listing the documented facts of his own conduct. I have never once stolen from a children's cancer charity. I have never invoked the Fifth Amendment 500 times to evade questions about my own business. I have never been banned from operating a corporation in my own state due to fraud findings. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in the power of moral conviction. Therefore, when you wish to lecture this nation on morality, when you want to discuss who is sad and who deserves better, I offer one simple recommendation. She looked him directly in the eye, the statement becoming the segment's most powerful, lasting soundbite. Pick up a mirror. The progressive side of the audience erupted in sustained applause. Even the conservative members appeared conflicted, unable to process the ethical chasm between Eric's rhetoric and Crockett's documented reality. Eric Trump's posture shifted from combative confidence to visible defense, his shoulders beginning to hunch. But Jasmine Crockett was far from finished. Crockett transitioned seamlessly from character assassination to civic responsibility, moving to the day that constituted the gravest political violence in recent American history, January 6, 2021. Eric's face tightened instantly. This was the most volatile territory. Demanding extreme caution, he insisted he had always supported peaceful protest and election integrity. You spoke at the Save America rally that morning on the Ellipse, Crockett stated, affirming his involvement. I addressed the critical importance of ensuring every legal vote was counted and protecting our electoral process. Eric responded, using the sanitized campaign language. And during that address, Crockett countered, consulting her notes for precision. Because in a democracy, words carry consequences. You told the crowd, and I quote exactly, "We need to march on the Capitol today." A visible ripple of anxiety ran through the audience at the recollection of the inciting words. Eric attempted the standard legal deflection, claiming his statement was encouragement for peaceful civic engagement, protected by the First Amendment. Within hours of your specific instruction to march on the Capitol, Crockett countered, her voice now devoid of warmth. 140 police officers were injured. They were beaten with flagpoles, American flagpoles repurposed as weapons against American law enforcement officers. They were crushed in doorways by the surging mob. They were sprayed with chemical irritants, including bear mace. She began listing the human cost with cold, prosecutorial solemnity, citing the casualties like items on an irrefutable bill. Officer Brian Sicknick, a veteran, collapsed after being assaulted by rioters and tragically died the following day. She then named the subsequent tragedies, the officers who responded to the attack and later died by suicide: Howard Liebengood, Jeffrey Smith, Kyle DeFreytag, Gunther Hashida. These were law enforcement officers. Mr. Trump, she emphasized, her voice heavy with the gravity of the names. The very individuals your party claims to support unconditionally. And they died, some from physical injuries, some from the sheer trauma of responding to an attack that you personally helped to incite. Eric's jaw was locked. He insisted these tragic deaths had nothing to do with his speech. They have everything to do with what happened that day. Crockett corrected him with finality. And after the unprecedented violence, after the Confederate flag was paraded through the halls of Congress for the first time in history, after rioters erected a gallows on the Capitol grounds and chanted death threats against the vice president, you went directly to social media and blamed Antifa. She pulled out her phone, reading the conspiratorial post he had amplified, which suggested the violence was the work of Antifa infiltrators, a blatant attempt to absolve his own supporters of responsibility for their actions. Eric attempted to challenge the notion, claiming legitimate questions existed regarding the perpetrators. There were no legitimate questions. Crockett cut him off decisively. The FBI investigated. They confirmed the overwhelming majority of individuals arrested for the violence on January 6 were Trump supporters. Your supporters. People who traveled to Washington because your family had repeatedly told them the election was stolen. People who heard you say, "March on the Capitol," and complied. She delivered the most damning testimony of all. The words of the arrested rioters themselves. Do you know what many of them stated upon arrest? They said the president told them to. They said the Trump family told them to fight. They said they were following orders. You supplied those orders, Mr. Trump, she stated, her voice dropping to a powerful whisper. You stood on that stage and directed them to march. And when they executed exactly what you requested, you immediately fabricated a conspiracy theory to blame someone else. She returned to his initial, callous insult. You called Democrats, not people. Mr. Trump, you asserted we lack morals. Yet, on January 6, it was not Democrats beating police officers with American flags. It was not Democrats erecting gallows and chanting death threats. It was not Democrats smearing faces on the walls of the United States Capitol. So, when you wish to discuss morality, when you seek to explain to America which side has abandoned ethics, she pressed, her eyes boring into him, I need you to summon the courage to answer one simple, definitive question. Where do you acquire the sheer audacity? Eric offered no reply. For the first time all night, he was defeated. He didn't even attempt a defense. Anderson Cooper intervened, glancing at the clock and receiving clear signals from his producers. The segment had exceeded its planned runtime by a significant margin. Yet the nation remained captivated. We have time for one final exchange, Cooper announced. Jasmine Crockett set her infamous briefcase aside, a visual sign that the evidence-based cross-examination was concluded. For this final moment, the only required item was pure human accountability. Mr. Trump, she began, her voice softening, adopting a tone that was almost contemplative, even mournful. I have one final question, and I genuinely request an unevasive answer. Eric, worn down by the relentless factual assault, nodded wearily. At this stage, he would agree to almost anything to end the public humiliation. Crockett systematically reviewed the ledger of his public accountability. Your family foundation was forcibly closed by court order for misusing charitable funds. You were personally fined $4 million for fraud. You invoked the Fifth Amendment over 500 times regarding your own business. You stated publicly that half of America was not even people. You stood on a stage and told a crowd to march on the Capitol hours before the worst attack on Congress in 2 centuries. She paused, collecting her focus, not on the crimes, but on the missing human element. Through every single verdict, every scandal, every court order, and every associated tragedy, I have meticulously reviewed thousands of pages of transcripts and consumed hundreds of hours of Trump family statements. Eric frowned, his exhausted face betraying confusion. What is missing? I have never once heard you articulate 2 simple words, Crockett stated, the studio achieving absolute, painful silence. Eric's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, searching for a lifeline, his father, his lawyers, his handlers, but finding only the camera lenses and the unforgiving studio lights. He whispered the question. What words? Jasmine Crockett gazed at Eric Trump with an expression of profound, tired sadness. "I'm sorry." The silence that followed was immense, stretching for agonizing seconds. Eric's gaze darted around the room, desperately seeking an escape hatch, a pivot point, any way to avoid the question. He started, stopped, and finally stammered out the only defense he knew. The foundation did extensive, positive work. "I am not asking about the foundation's work," Crockett corrected gently. "I am asking if you, Eric Trump, the man, have ever looked at any of the people harmed by your family's actions and sincerely offered those two words." Silence. "The police officers who were injured and died following the events of January 6th. Did you apologize to them?" Silence. "The genuine donors who believed their money was going directly to sick children? Did you apologize to them?" Silence. "The half of America you publicly described as, not even people. Did you ever offer an apology to them?" Eric's face, which had cycled through various shades of anger and defiance, settled into a gray, defeated resignation. He finally understood the nature of his defeat. "I stand by my record," he stated quietly, the familiar defense now sounding empty and hollow. Crockett nodded, as if confirming a long-held hypothesis. "That is exactly the answer I expected. You are incapable of saying those words because you were never instructed to. In your family's worldview, an apology is a fatal flaw. Accountability is reserved for the weak. Taking responsibility is an admission that someone else holds a valid perspective." She turned her attention to the camera, addressing the millions watching at home. "And that, America, is why people like me continue the fight. We fight because we believe in something larger than ourselves. We fight because when we are wrong, we admit it. We fight because we recognize that this fragile republic functions only when people in positions of power can articulate those two words." She turned back to Eric, rising to her feet, her briefcase in hand. "I'm sorry. You have spent your entire life in buildings bearing your name. You were afforded every advantage, wealth, connections, platforms, lawyers," she concluded, her voice ringing with disappointment. "And yet, with all that privilege, the extent of your ethical achievement was to take money intended for cancer-stricken children and call half the country subhuman. That, Mr. Trump, is not a business empire," she finalized, exiting the scene of the confrontation. "That is merely a cautionary tale." Half the audience instantly rose in a thunderous standing ovation. Eric Trump sat utterly alone beneath the studio lights. A man who had finally met an opponent who could not be bullied, bought, or bored into submission. He had met a woman armed exclusively with receipts. Within 6 hours of the broadcast's conclusion, the video clip of Crockett's climactic challenge, "Pick Up a Mirror," had exceeded 22 million views. By the following morning, the debate clips had been aggregated to over 40 million, eventually accumulating more than 200 million combined views across all major platforms within the week. The resulting cultural fallout was immediate and devastating. The memes were merciless. Eric Trump's frozen, speechless expression after the question, "I'm sorry," became the ubiquitous template for moments of unavoidable accountability across the internet. When your boss asks about the missing project, when your professor finds the plagiarism, the phrase, "Eric destroyed," trended globally, quickly evolving into a new cultural verb. The most telling consequence was the silence. For 9 consecutive days, an unprecedented record, Donald Trump did not mention Eric in any public statement, social media post, or rally comment. The man who habitually commented on every minute slide offered no defense for his son's televised annihilation. When finally pressed by reporters, Trump pivoted instantly to attacking the New York Attorney General, failing even to utter Eric's name. It was an existential erasure. The conservative media ecosystem, which had shielded Eric for years, abruptly developed profound scheduling conflicts. Fox News hosts who had offered him softball interviews suddenly prioritized other, less receipt-heavy news cycles. The silence from the right-wing press was more damaging than any direct criticism could have been. The Wall Street Journal published a rare, measured critique beginning, even by Trump family standards. The charity revelations aired on CNN raise questions that demand serious answers. For that publication, this was equivalent to a full condemnation. Professional consequences manifested rapidly. Within 2 weeks, Republican National Committee officials quietly informed Laura Trump, Eric's wife, that his presence at upcoming party events would constitute a distraction. A major political action committee quietly refilmed planned advertisements, removing Eric entirely and substituting other family members at significant expense. By the 1-month mark, the corporate language of containment began. The Trump Organization announced Eric would be focusing on internal operations and stepping back from public-facing responsibilities. Corporate code for being hidden from public view. His lucrative speaking engagement fees plummeted from $75 to $15, and several scheduled appearances were canceled by hosts citing unforeseen circumstances. His cryptocurrency ventures, World Liberty Financial and American Bitcoin, began hemorrhaging investors, who cited reputational risk and ironic fear for partners of a Saudi-backed golf league, which also saw its negotiations with Eric abruptly stall. At the 3-month mark, the verb, to be Eric, D, entered the American lexicon. It signified being utterly destroyed by your own record, dismantled by an opponent whose preparation was so complete that no spin, lie, or deflection could succeed. It meant being too late to realize someone had done their homework while you were practicing your power poses. A language column in the Washington Post traced the etymology of Eric D as a term for accountability meeting privilege. Jasmine Crockett, the author of this political vocabulary, became a national icon. She delivered the keynote address at the National Press Club, and Time magazine profiled her as the receipt keeper. Her campaign fundraising exploded, fueled by small-dollar donations from all 50 states. A poll found that 71% of Americans would trust Crockett over any Trump in business ethics matters. Law schools requested the debate transcript for use in cross-examination and evidence presentation courses. A professor at Georgetown, Eric Trump's alma mater, described it as a masterclass in destroying a witness without ever raising your voice. 6 months later, Eric Trump had effectively vanished from public life. He no longer appeared on cable news, ceased public political commentary, and his social media devolved into quiet posts about family and golf, safe topics that could not lead back to the Fifth Amendment or charity fraud. He had finally learned the lesson Crockett intended to teach him, in a world dominated by perpetual documentation, where a woman with a small briefcase and a photographic memory can access everything. No one is too rich to be held accountable, no one is too powerful to face questions, and nobody is too important to apologize. Eric Trump spent years asserting he built a charity empire. He only built receipts. He claimed Democrats weren't people. A Democrat just proved he was barely a businessman.